Alright, now we're going to see how to use feathers to build out a set of screens and to use those screens with the ScreenNavigator. So to do that, we're going to include a bunch of stuff in here, such as ScreenNavigator, ScreenNavigator item. We're going to use a tab bar to expose this on the UI layer. We're going to need a list collection to populate the tab bar. And we're going to also use a fade transition for moving between screens in a nice way. So you'll notice that I'm importing screens.aboutScreen, screens.homescreen, and screens.feedScreen here. These are all located under my screens package, and here they are. Here we have home screen, about screen, and feed screen. So they're really pretty simple. They are in the package of screens, as mentioned. Depending on which screen it is we're using, we're doing different things. So on the home screen, we're using our image loader. On the about screen, we're using a label. We're just putting out some text. So if you look here, for each of these screens, it's pretty simple what we do. What we do is on initialization, so this is important for screens, we're going to override a protected screen function called initialize. And this is what runs when the screen is initialized. So we're going to invoke two different functions here. One is to build the container, and then the other is to build the components that go into that container for each screen. You could set this up in a different way. This is just a way that I find very straightforward and organized to do this. So on build container, the first thing we do is create a layout. In this case, I'm creating a vertical layout. And then I create my scroll container. And when I create my scroll container, I want to set the container width and container height to the ScreenNavigator width and height. So I use this little trick here to go through and set a temporary variable called p, which stands for parent. I set it to this, so the screen parent, as a ScreenNavigator. And then I can easily get the width and height of the ScreenNavigator and set the scroll container to that. Then I add that child scroll container to my screen. So then the scroll container is in place. Then we go through and we build the components for each one. So for this one, we're just using the image loader that we used before and just adding that. So pretty straightforward. On the about screen, I do the exact same thing, except on build components, I am adding a label where I'm just putting some text in there attributing the application to myself. We have feed screen as well, which is basically just rendering an empty list, but again, it does the same exact sort of structure for the screen class. Alright, so we have these screen classes created. Now we can use them within our application, and to use them, what we need to do is set up a ScreenNavigator component. So here's where we do that. It's also important, not necessary, but organizational wise, to set up a couple of static constants for each of your screens. So these are identifiers where you can identify each screen by constant and string, because this is what we're going to use inside of the ScreenNavigator. So inside of build app, not only do I set my theme, but I have two separate functions, one to set screens and one to build layout. Build layout is basically doing most everything that we've done already. So it's creating the header, and what's different is that it's also creating a tab bar and a ScreenNavigator. So before I call build layouts, I want to set up my ScreenNavigator because that's important. The tab bar depends upon the ScreenNavigator in order to work. So I set ScreenNavigator equal to a new ScreenNavigator, and then I add all three of my screens to ScreenNavigator. And you'll notice I'm adding that by ID, so home screen, feed screen, and so forth. These are the constants that we defined above here. And I'm setting those equal to a new ScreenNavigator item of home screen, feed screen, or about screen. So those are the exact classes that we've defined right here: home screen, about screen, and feed screen. Additionally, I'm setting a transition to my ScreenNavigator, and this will happen whenever a transition between screens happens. And for this, I'm just setting fade.create crossfade transition. You can read up on all the different transitions. You can do things like cubes and flips and all sorts of neat things. I'm just using a simple crossfade here. So inside of our layout, we create our header just like before. And now we create a tab bar. The tab bar is going to allow us to jump between screens, and it's going to control our ScreenNavigator. So the tab bar has a data provider, which is of type list collection. And in here we just pass in a label and data, which is the identifier for each of these. So the label is what's going to show up on the screen that somebody can see, and the data is going to be the unique identifier for each particular screen that we added to our ScreenNavigator up here. So that's how that's all bound together. To listen for our change events, so when somebody clicks on something within the tab bar, we're going to invoke something called ScreenChanged. That's just a basic event listener here. And then we can set the width of our tab bar equal to the stage width. Whenever we call validate inside of Feathers, what that's doing is it's calculating how much space it occupies and where it lives on the screen and so forth. And the reason we call that right here is because we want to get the tab bar height when we calculate what the actual tab bar Y position should be, because we're actually going through and setting the Y position of our tab bar, in my case, to the bottom of the screen. We then set the selected index of the tab bar to 0. So home screen would be 0, feed would be 1, about would be 2. It's a 0-based index. So setting that index to 0 is going to select our home in the tab bar. But that's not actually going to show that particular screen. We have to do that manually down below. And here's kind of where we do that. We set up our ScreenNavigator Y position to be directly under the app header that we created. We set its width according to the stage width and its height according to the stage height, but with concessions for the app header height and the tab bar height. Then we invoke ScreenNavigator show screen and pass in our home screen identifier. So that's what's actually going to show that screen for us. Even though we set selected index of our tab bar, we also need to do this in order for it to trigger properly. We then simply go ahead and add each of these items. So we add our ScreenNavigator, our app header, and our tab bar. And that should pretty much do it. Now, when we add this event listener event change, we're invoking ScreenChanged. When ScreenChange happens, we're going to invoke ScreenNavigator.showScreen, just like we did right here, except we're going to pass in the tab bar selected item data. So that's going to be something like home screen, feed screen, about screen. It's those unique identifiers. So let's compile this and run it, and we can see exactly how it looks. So here we have our header, we have our ScreenNavigator here, and our tab bar. The tab bar index is set to 0, so it's showing the home screen right now. And we've told the ScreenNavigator manually to show that particular screen. If I click on any of these, it's going to perform our fade, and it's also going to display that screen and change the index of the tab bar. So it's all working wonderfully for us, and this is all GPU accelerated content.